The escape of terror suspect Daniel Khalif has again brought into question the state of the prison service, both in terms of the infrastructure of our ageing jails and the way it copes with an ever-increasing population of inmates. Tonight, we're asking if our prison service is fit for purpose. Joining me now is former prisoner Jonathan Robinson, who now campaigns for prison reform, and the General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association, Steve Gillan. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. If I can start with you, first of all, Jonathan, your thoughts on what has unfolded in terms of this prison escape and what it tells us about our prison system.
Good evening, Gillian. You're talking to a person who, more than 10 years ago, served a totally deserved, very short prison sentence, which changed my life and opened my eyes as to what's not going on in prison. Fast forward to that, once I started my work on prison reform, in about 2013, when Michael Gove became Secretary of State for Prisons, he turned Wandsworth into a reform prison. The then Governor, Ian Beckers, who now works for the MOJ, I believe, invited me in, having sent me an email, having read my work, saying clearly we're not doing anything as well as we could do. And when I arrived at his then reform prison, I found, HMP Wandsworth, I found staff reading newspapers in the gatehouse. I found filth within the grounds but outside. And even then, a very sad state of affairs. Since then, staffing levels have gone way south, and I anticipate what my fellow guest is going to say about that situation. Prison officers are still trained for 8 weeks in this country. In Norway, it's 3 years. This person who has departed the premises from Wandsworth clearly had some assistance from some individuals. But
Jonathan, let's bring Steve in, because we'll continue to discuss the particulars of this breakout. But just wondering if, Steve, you recognise what Jonathan has said so far about the state of the prison service.
Well, we've been saying for many years now, since 2010, about the state of the prison service, and that's because the prison service has been vandalised in such a way with budget cuts, reducing staff. I think Jonathan made a very valid point, actually, in relation to 8 weeks training. We've always said that training is inadequate. I've heard some commentators today say about young staff being inexperienced in different things. I want to make it absolutely clear. We've got absolute confidence in young staff, but I'm afraid they haven't been nurtured along, because they get rid of all the experienced staff way back in about 2012 with a massive redundancy, where 9,000 experienced prison officer grades were allowed to leave the service. And we pleaded with government at the time not to do that, and they ignored that. And I think they're beginning to reap what they've sown, quite frankly. I mean, if you don't give the proper resources to prison officers, they're not going to be able to do the job that the public expect. So the analogy that I would give, you wouldn't ask a motor mechanic to build an engine with a hammer and chisel. Neither should you expect a prison officer. They're so stretched at Wandsworth, not just at Wandsworth, but all over the country. We're sending 300 prison officers a day at a cost of £1 million for hotel bills each month to patch up a creaking service. We really are in crisis, quite frankly.
And Jonathan, you mentioned training, inadequate training previously, but Steve obviously talking about cuts. Do you think that cuts are responsible?
Partly also due to a plethora of Secretary of States of prisons. I mean, you can make 2 football teams. It's a mess. Our current Prime Minister, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't mentioned the prison problem once. We have the worst reoffending in the EU. It costs a fortune, and from my experience, seeing young people in prison coming in, out, and whilst the system has them, doing effectively nothing with them. Charlie Taylor's been on all the media today saying that prison education is a farce, which is what I saw and what I've been banging on about. I've just talked about the plethora of Secretary of States, the amount of prison ministers we could make 3 football teams with. They seem to have this rhetoric of we are employing more prison officers, blah, 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 blah. I have strong intelligence that some people who have passed the filter to become prison officers have been illiterate. If Mr. Chalk, Mr. Sunak, and whoever else is in charge, Phil Coppell, who is in charge of the prison system, who keeps tweeting he's very proud of the system, until the people in charge can go, we have a problem, then first of all, youngsters coming into prison who are doing nothing with will keep leaving, coming back. Secondly, people who have been accused of terrorist atrocities, who have probably been put in the wrong prison. I believe this gentleman should have been in Belmarsh. Why, how he got a job in the kitchens, I don't know. Quite how, why a vehicle left H&B Wandsworth without being mirror checked underneath, I don't know. We're back to the top of my story. Staff sitting, poorly trained staff, disinterested staff, unmotivated staff sitting around reading newspapers.
Yes.
It's a mess. It's carry on prisons.
Let's bring Steve back in. Do you agree with that point that the calibre of prison officers needs to be addressed? And also, would you agree with those that are calling for Wandsworth in particular to be shut down?
2 issues there. I think inexperienced staff need to be nurtured along. And I think that, I said in my opening statement that the prison service and government were wrong to get rid of all those experienced staff. But I'm not going to run down new prison officers, quite frankly. I think they do a magnificent job on behalf of society in very difficult circumstances. And I've got nothing but praise for young prison officers coming into a broken system, just like the police. The whole criminal justice system is pretty much in meltdown. And that's why my union has called for a royal commission into the whole criminal justice system in order that it can be established what we want to do in this country with law and order. I mean, you get police officers now with less than 5 years service as well. Replicates what's happening in the prison service. And it was done as budget cuts to cheapen the wage bill. There's no getting away from that. So governments reap what they sow. But in relation to that, I actually think we're at a crossroads now. Either we do something about it, and talk is cheap. My members want to see action. By the way, I don't think what Charlie Taylor said today about closing Wandsworth, I think that's just a cheap headline. And I think Charlie got carried away there, quite frankly. What he also said about Cook and Wood was, I think, disrespectful to my members who do a dangerous job. And I've seen some horrendous injuries to my members at Cook and Wood and across the whole prison estate. So I would caution against cheap headlines.
Okay, Steve
Perhaps
Gillan.
if they'd invested in Wandsworth rather than neglecting it, we wouldn't be in this position.
Steve Gillan, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us, Steve Gillan there and Jonathan Robinson. Thank you both.
Thank you, Gillan.